Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carol Peters, and I'm proud to serve as the President and CEO of United Way Next. We are the alumni network. We have members who represent local United Way staff, our retirees and alumni, as well as our organizational members who are made up of United Ways across the country. I recognize today and want to acknowledge that we're coming into this space with a range of emotions, given that we just had an election on Tuesday. I am hopeful that you each had the opportunity to spend some time reflecting yesterday, but I honor the fact that not everyone had that opportunity. As we move through this space today, Mary E. Tyler, our United Way Next board member and DEIB work group member, is going to help facilitate this session. I am thrilled to have 4 local United Way professionals join us today and cannot thank them enough for the incredible work that they're doing in their United Ways, within their communities, and across the country, serving as key leaders. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Mary E. Tyler.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much, Carol. I too want to welcome and thank you all for joining this virtual roundtable. I extend a virtual shout out to our United Way Next board members joining us, and special thanks to the DEIB subgroup and programming committee colleagues who helped make this roundtable possible. We're thrilled to have you join this important and timely discussion today. We gather as a community committed to fostering an environment where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to contribute their unique perspectives and talents. Your participation here today signifies a shared dedication to creating spaces of true inclusion and equity. Throughout our time together, we aim to engage in meaningful dialogue, share insights, and explore actionable strategies that help us to build a more inclusive and just society. As Carol said, we are excited because we're fortunate to have 4 very impressive United Way colleagues as our guest speakers today. They will share outstanding examples of advancing this work internally and externally in their communities. And to allow ample time for the speakers, I've asked them to introduce themselves as they begin. Each will have an opportunity to share 2 topics that we think will be invaluable information. I'll be able to ask some questions afterward. And as part of the format, we want to open up discussion so that you can raise questions either by just chiming in or adding something to the chat box. Thank you for your presence and your willingness to engage in this vital work. This is going to be an enriching and collaborative session with exciting experiences and ideas as we work to make lasting change in our communities throughout the country. So to kick it off, we are excited for Kelly to begin sharing the exciting things that are happening in her community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary. And hello, everybody from the Florida Panhandle. I am Kelly Jasen, very proud to be the president and CEO of United Way Emerald Coast. I love saying that we are a small but mighty team here in the Florida Panhandle. Just for a little context, I have 3 full-timers, 5 part-timers, and we generate about 1.2 million annually. So I believe in leveraging the network, using the power of United Way partnerships. And so when we started kind of our equity journey a few years ago, definitely reached out to see what else is already happening at some of these other United Ways across the nation, and what can we adapt and what can we bring here. But our equity journey really was accelerated. 2 years ago, we were selected for a 4-year health equity, diversity, and inclusion grant from Florida Blue Foundation, the Blue Cross Blue Shield in our state. And that was a $400,000 investment in our work, which was significant in size. And we were just really humbled to be selected as one of about 6, I think, organizations across the state of Florida chosen for that health equity, diversity, and inclusion grant. 2 of the big things that we are doing as a result of that funding that I wanted to highlight here on this Zoom today. The first is the launch of Project Lead, which is our board training program. I know that those efforts exist again in many other United Ways. I'm calling them Project Blueprint, if that's familiar to some of you. And many others, but we didn't have any kind of board training program here in our community. And so as we were thinking about our role and kind of that unique perspective that United Ways bring, we felt like this was something that we could really make a difference in our community. So LEAD, like everything else that we do, is an acronym that I stole from another United Way that had already created it. It stands for Leadership, Effectiveness, and Diversity. And so this program has the goal of really helping to cultivate a pipeline of diverse, qualified individuals that undergo just some basic training about what it means to be a board member so that they can serve effectively in local nonprofits or similar roles, in maybe the other community or public sector settings. So the way that we launched our program, which was launched last year, we're recruiting right now for our 2nd class, but we looked for a class size of about 20 individuals. We had an open application process. It was competitive in the first year. We didn't know if we were going to have 1 person apply or 50 people apply. So we were really proud to have a competitive process year one, but it was set up to be a series of 6 workshops over the course of 5 months. They meet once a month in kind of the afternoon time for about a 2 or 3 hour workshop. We brought in key community leaders to teach each of our sessions, covering a wide range of topics, what they would need in order to really serve a nonprofit board well. So governance, strategic planning, communications, fundraising, servant leadership, storytelling, marketing, advocacy. We squeezed all of those topics in across these 6 workshops over 5 months. We also we hosted a graduation, and at the end really tried to pair our graduates with the nonprofits that we partner with across the community. So we were really proud that within 3 months of graduation, almost half of our class was already placed in new roles, board members or committees at local nonprofits. So we're launching year 2 now and started our recruitment, and we are just really excited. Really wanted to make sure that we were reaching an audience that maybe doesn't always follow us. So our NAACP, helps us promote it. We have a Latin publication with a really great following. He helps us promote it. Our chambers of commerce are key players. Each of our workshops is hosted at one of our local chambers of commerce. We cover a 2-county area, so there are 5 different chambers. So we bounce around, making sure that we're reaching all areas of our geography as well. And it's just been really exciting. It's been really game-changing. Got a really wonderful response from our first class, and everybody that we reached out to be a speaker, when we told them the objective and the purpose of this, they all said yes, and they jumped right in, most of them donating their services in kind as well, which was really phenomenal, and I think spoke to the need and the interest here in our local community for a program like that. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is how we are utilizing Alice here to really, that's the way that we're starting a lot of our equity conversations. The Panhandle and Florida in itself is a tough area to be having some of these conversations sometimes. So we go in as Alice champions and found that that's been a really great way just to open up conversations, talking about disparities that exist, barriers that exist, and why our households continue to struggle. So we now host Alice simulations. You know, many of you have probably sat in on a poverty simulation before. We just renamed them Alice. Which I hope is an acronym that many of you are familiar with: Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. The United Way of New Jersey puts out these amazing reports from many of the states, and the state of Florida is a really proud partner in those efforts. So if you don't yet have an Alice report, work with your state association and please get one. But we host these 2.5 to 3 hour immersive experiences where individuals can come in and really experience what it might be like to live in an Alice or a low to moderate income household. And it's just a really great lesson in empathy. We weave in, of course, what United Way does, who 211 is. But what we found is that a couple of our credit unions and businesses here now really love this, and they've hosted workshops just for their teammates. Our most recent one we did in partnership with the Air Force Base. We have a really high military population here, and so the last one was all leadership. Your wing commander of the Air Force Base was one of the 7-year-old children in a household, and so we really got to see it and think it through also the lens of what his airmen and their families are facing every day. So then we can share, of course, the Alice data and break it down and just open up those discussions as to what's really happening here in our 2-county area.
Wow, Kelly, that is incredible. And I saw some comments to the same sentiment. They're excited to hear more, and you're going to learn more about how these will be featured in our upcoming year to learn more and go into a deeper dive that Carol will share with you in detail. So thank you again, Kelly. I have a couple of questions. I'm going to come back to those, but now if we could turn the program over to Sherry.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mary. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sherry Sanchez Tibbetts. I'm Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with Greater Twin Cities United Way. I'm coming from Minnesota. It is probably about 40 degrees outside and sunny, so really pleasant weather for us, considering it's November. At Greater Twin Cities United Way, we're really committed to building a community where everyone thrives regardless of race, income, or place. You can see our unwavering commitment to advancing equity in our community in the way we prioritize our grant making and how we use real-time data from 988 and 211 to help shape our public policy agenda, and how we work to remove systemic barriers by advocating for legislative and administrative changes. So what our work has taught us is that complex problems often remain in place because of constraints like policies, social narratives, or power imbalances, which are part of most systems. So it was important for us to recognize that as a philanthropic organization, that sometimes those issues also occurred inside our organization, where the system that we're trying to change is our culture. So today I'm excited to share how we're creating a more inclusive workplace and building on donor diversification efforts, even during these VUCA times. Now, just very quickly, is everyone familiar with the term VUCA? Volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Kind of sounds familiar, doesn't it? But I did propose this title to Carol in July. So amid ambiguity, data really becomes essential for making informed decisions. After all, stories make you memorable, but data makes you credible. So as DEI leaders, we can help guide our United Ways in analyzing data to identify trends, preferences, gaps in engagement, and we see this both internally and external engagement. So I'm going to start by sharing out about our employee engagement from last year. Last year, we invited 150 Greater Twin Cities United Way staff to participate in an employee engagement survey. We had about an 80% response rate. Wow. We learned that what we did well, we did very well, sometimes exceeding benchmarks and receiving over an 80% favorable rates on things like resources for staff, living our values, performance and accountability, pay and benefits, and trust in people leaders. But the survey also identified some areas for growth for us, like communications, change management, trust, and inclusion. And I know somebody's thinking, wait a minute, Sherry, didn't you just say that you scored well in trust and people leaders? And now you're saying trust is a growth area. The answer is yes to both. The survey showed that we had outstanding people leaders who built solid teams with a lot built on trust. But as a person moved further out away from that immediate relationship to a department leader or senior leader or their executive team member, we found that the trust decreased. So trust is an organizational area for us to work on. For each of the opportunity areas, we reviewed the survey data department with senior and people leaders to develop plans for moving forward. But for trust and inclusion, we also added a series of focus groups so that all staff, not just people leaders, could provide some feedback. The focus groups were facilitated by an outside facilitator. They were held in person, virtually, and our facilitator also developed an anonymous written feedback form so that people could feel comfortable sharing feedback around what an inclusive environment could or should look like. And then from our focus groups, we developed a series of 18 concrete action steps for both trust and inclusion, which included short-term, intermediate, and long-term strategies. Around trust, some of the strategies included things like making sure that our senior leaders and our executive team were more visible. So we created regular office hours for our executive team and senior leaders, putting time on calendars, holding it, and then posting those times on our internal hub. We also created quarterly meetings between our executive team and our internal employee resource groups. They meet on a quarterly basis, share information, provide updates, and really allow for cross dialogue. Some of the other recommendations to conduct a policies, practices, and systems review to identify any barriers to equity and highlight what we're doing well. Now that's on deck for 2025, so we don't have any report yet on that. And then finally, the recommendation was to enhance communication and conflict resolution skills. After all, we're in Minneapolis and we're in the Midwest. Meanwhile, our inclusion strategies ranged from create a prayer space and lactation room, which we already had both of those, but we relocated the spaces to make them more accessible, refurbished them to make them more inviting, and we renamed the mother's room to a lactation room. Another recommendation was to develop a DEI task force. So our Culture and Inclusion Council, which is a cross-functional committee that staff apply to, is taking on this role as our DEI task force. And then finally, one of the last recommendations for inclusion was to integrate DEI metrics into performance reviews. But this wasn't just a separate DEI metric. Rather, it was finding those areas where DEI could be applied to existing work streams. For example, the advocacy will track the number of diverse legislators who support our agenda. Marcoms will track paid and earned media in diverse sources, and our community impact team incorporated an unconscious bias training for community grant reviewers. Now, the recommendations and dashboards were posted on our internal hub, were shared in staff meetings and with our board. And next week, starting Monday, we're launching our follow-up survey so we can measure the progress on the work that we've done. So while DEI initiatives are essential for fostering that inclusive and equitable workplace, their impact really needs to extend beyond internal staff development. It's been my experience that DEI plays a critical role in new market engagement, where it shapes how an organization connects and engages with a diverse range of communities, donors, volunteers, and partners. By integrating DEI into external facing strategies like donor diversification, it really helps create authentic engagement that reflects the values of the communities represented. It helps build trust with new audiences and ensures that all voices can contribute to the mission. Now, for me, DEI involvement in donor diversification is also about changing the social narrative around who a philanthropist is within our community. So some quick takeaways around how DEI can partner with advancement is to build a broad and inclusive network, really connect with those community leaders, influencers, stakeholders, and organizations to gain valuable insight for effective engagement, which is particularly important because we know a one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work during VUCA times. DEI leaders can develop unique engagement strategies that are tailored for a specific donor segment, and then ensure that outreach efforts are more personalized and impactful. And then I'm going to say, finally, this is really true for communications. We all know that creating a message that resonates with donors, volunteers, and other supporters is crucial, but culturally resonant marketing has to go beyond just visual representation. It's requiring an understanding of community priorities, choosing appropriate language, really aligning your organizational efforts with community values, and then selecting the most impactful media platform that's going to vary from each community to community. And finally, Mary, one last thing. I just want to encourage all DEI and advancement folks to develop a good collaborative relationship. That's the approach we're taking at United Way. DEI is partnering with advancement to develop our overall donor diversification strategy, ensure that our new United Way becomes a training hub for corporate ERGs, and to co-create a new model for giving communities. Because after all, DEI, like fundraising, is everybody's job. Some of us just have more direct lines of responsibility.
Wow. Thank you, Sherry, so much. I'm not certain, but I would imagine you're picking up some incredible nuggets just from the two presenters so far. Thank you so much, Sherry. And I've got a couple of questions. I'm going to come back to you as well. Thank you. And Neil, thank you for putting the document in the chat, the VOCA that individuals might want to look at to get more information about that concept and that theory. Next, we want to turn it over to Wainie from my old stomping grounds in Central Maryland. So welcome and thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Wainie Youn, the Associate Vice President of Equity and Special Initiatives at the United Way of Central Maryland in the greater Baltimore area. Our United Way promotes equity and creates opportunity and access across the Central Maryland region. Our area encompasses the city of Baltimore and the surrounding counties, which are vibrant and diverse, representing a range of perspectives, backgrounds, as well as urban and rural communities. As we are advancing our equity goals, which are centered around fostering an equitable organizational culture where employees of different backgrounds feel a true sense of belonging and feel that they can be their authentic selves in our space. We want to partner with our communities to amplify their voice and support them in driving the change that they know they need to see in communities. We want to ensure that the boards, our volunteer leaders, our membership councils that are reflective of the vibrant diversity of the Central Maryland area. And of course, as we're doing this work around equity, that we are acknowledging the root causes that do exist, that these community challenges did not appear out of nowhere, and that we are keeping that at the core of the work that we're doing. And so to achieve these goals, we need a quality team that is truly representative of the region, that looks like the area, that is really poised to recognize the challenges that the communities are facing. And so one of the areas that we are really prioritizing when we started this journey, I've been with us for several years now, is we wanted to deepen the data that we were collecting so we could understand the makeup of our staff and we can be intentional about growing those areas, not only from a sort of longitudinal approach, but also just understanding where there are opportunities for growth within the areas of representation. And so when we would previously perform our metrics for the organization, we would do a blanket sort of what is the people of color versus Caucasian white breakdown. And that would be a part of a broader organizational report that we would provide quarterly. We had since expanded that so we could understand from a leadership perspective, how was that pipeline developed? What does our executive leadership team, what do our executive leadership teams look like? If we're familiar with data in the nonprofit space, as well as just organization-wide within companies, we know that you would, for organizations that are performing well in terms of their overall representation from a race and ethnicity and gender standpoint, that volume, that representation tends to sit at the mid and early entry career level. And so we have been able to take a look at our teams overall from a senior leadership perspective, break it down by vice president, associate vice president. And I'm proud that our United Way, we have 202 staff at this time. So we're, from the standpoint of staff, we're a little larger, but that gives us a lot of data to certainly work with. And so through that process, the beginning of our current CEO, who really brought this focus to us and this intentional prioritization of equity, we went from 0% of our leaders at the senior vice president and above level representing communities of color in a region where there's 46% overall when you encompass the various communities and how across persons of color, 46%. We had 0% representation at that senior vice president and above level. We have since evolved to 54% within that time. So our senior leadership is certainly diverse. We are proud that even at the levels below that, our vice president and associate vice president level, we are at that at least 40% benchmark for those areas of the organization as well. We leverage our local partners. We leverage certainly the local institutions. We have 2 strong HBCUs in our community. We also really work closely with professional development organizations. There is an organization called Alpha of Hispanic Professionals. Not only have we partnered with them in terms of deepening our connection to the Latinx Hispanic community, just to understand the needs and collecting data with some of our community surveys that we've conducted in that space, but it's also an opportunity for us to reach into this population from the standpoint of just increasing that pipeline. And so we have been very intentional about not only that representation, but creating a culture where that support is thriving. And so we have our internal champions, our Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee that have been core partners to me in this role. I give them kudos for the work that they started, just as staff that are passionate about this work, and they are holding us accountable, which we all know that accountability piece is so critical. So they help to bridge that connection, create really help to facilitate the education and learning opportunities, create some courageous conversations initiatives for us. We also have a mentorship program that we've started. We're in our third cohort, matching emerging leaders in the organization with senior level leaders to help to fuel, really help to build the skill sets that they require. We also have a managerial training program for our new managers as well, again, to build those skills. And so whether or not you're strengthening really that capacity from internally, or just the work that you've done, the depth and breadth of the work that you're able to bring that here, and we can ensure that you're growing within the organization. We are very intentional at our local United Way about prioritizing training opportunities, whether they're in the official sense, those sort of formal trainings, or helping to promote other external training opportunities as well. Because as we know, if we want folks to grow and really feel a part of the organization, we need to value the perspectives and insight they bring, and can't have this linear approach. We're assessing educational requirements, for example, ensuring that really encouraging hiring managers to take a look at the qualifications or the job descriptions and really assess, is this really essential to the role, or are there other ways in which we can determine one's capacity? At the end of the day, this focus on equity and DEI benefits everyone. It is not this one group that is benefiting, and it isn't all. We need to be very intentional about, especially, you know, when folks push back and say, well, DEI is just about these people. No, yes, it is about these individuals, but it is also about these individuals and you as well. So just keeping that and inclusive, especially in these times we find ourselves in, where we're going to continue to see an evolution of this work, but the core North Star does not change, which is just ensuring that we are creating opportunities and advancing equity for all.
Wow, fantastic. Thank you so very much. We're going to transition And Jen, if you can come on and share the exciting things that you're involved in your community, we would love to hear it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. Appreciate the invitation. I'm Jen Hsu-Bishop. I use they, them pronouns, and I serve as our Executive Impact and Equity Officer for United Way of South Central Michigan. I want to pause and recognize that our United Way of South Central Michigan, representing 6 counties in the state of Michigan, is located on lands historically occupied by the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi nations. I want to take that time right now to really acknowledge and honor that we're on the ancestral lands of the Three Fires Confederacy, and these are sacred lands for Indigenous peoples, and recognize their continued stewardship of our lands and our communities. And so I will highlight 2 topics that I think are timely and places that are really important to me as I think about our organization's equity, diversity, and inclusion initiatives. You know, one of those is really thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion in leadership. And I mean that both in terms of positionality, but also thinking about leadership as the spaces in which we hold influence, right? The spheres of influence in which we operate in. And that's all of us. All of us hold influence in many places in our lives, including within the workspace. So when I think about what that looks like, I think one of the places that we ought to continue to push on is that diversity, equity, and inclusion requires courage and it requires risk. And for those holding positions of leadership, and particularly those holding dominant identities, that opportunity for risk ought to be talked about more. And I think that's a space that, you know, I'd really love to open up more conversation around, to really talk about what does it look like, feel like, for leaders to hold each other accountable, to have hard conversations, to continue to practice humility around this work, and really to recognize that our work around equity, diversity, and inclusion is not about arriving, right? None of us are going to arrive in a place where we are done on this journey, but rather recognizing that this is an ongoing landscape for us to continue to deepen our own knowledge and our own ability to engage in this space. The other topic that I wanted to introduce as a space or opportunity for us to dig deeper is really thinking about how we can use different tools for reflection, co-learning, and relationship building. So our United Way engages in a lot of these different ways in terms of formal, trainings for our team members,